Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, good evening, friends, and welcome to this June 3rd, 2014 edition of Nightcast. We had a little hard time getting on tonight. Some of you saw earlier we opened with a blue screen. But we're on, and our first story tonight comes out of the Ukraine, where civilians in the Ukrainian town of Sloviansk have taken to sleeping in the basements of buildings, as fighting continues between separatists who want the region to be allied more closely to Russia and Ukrainian troops struggling to prevent the breakup of the country.
These days, this is a usual morning in many parts of Slavyansk in eastern Ukraine. People resort to sleeping in the basements of buildings like this psychiatric hospital, which was bombed 2 weeks ago, as fighting on the outskirts of town continues. It's not possible to treat people here anymore, but doctors and staff remain on site.
We have 3 patients left. People simply haven't been able to come and evacuate them.
More and more, buildings in residential areas are being hit. A few days ago, a shell landed on this hospital. Luckily, no one was killed. The home of the Mikhailova family hasn't been hit so far, but they still feel very anxious.
Yesterday, people were killed in one of the main streets. I have 4 children, and we were very scared.
The family decided to leave the city. They were allowed to take refuge in a monastery 30 kilometers outside Slavyansk. Shelling and straight bullets have already taken the lives of dozens of civilians, although it is difficult to get hold of precise numbers. While separatist fighters and Ukrainian troops blame each other for the violence, locals cry out in despair.
The government is responsible for this. How can Ukrainians kill Ukrainians? This should just not be happening.
But when evening comes, there is no more time for reflection. Locals need to rush back to the basements before shelling starts anew. Olga Ivshina, BBC News.
Friends, it started as a peaceful demonstration where hundreds of thousands calling for democratic reforms in communist China 25 years ago demonstrated in Tiananmen Square. But after weeks of protest recently in Tiananmen Square, the authorities sent in soldiers. 25 years ago, this is what happened now. The authorities sent in soldiers and tanks to clear the heart of the capital, killing hundreds of unarmed civilians. How much has changed in a quarter of a century? The BBC's China editor, Carrie Gracie, has been back to Beijing to find out what young people today are thinking.
This crowd weren't even born 25 years ago. Different flags, different slogans, different lives. This generation of students at a Beijing music festival not trying to be the conscience of China or to change the world. Just enjoying what freedoms they do have. Life goals for these friends: buy a house, buy a car, get married. So do they know about June the 4th? It's an open secret, they tell me, but they're too busy looking for a job to be thinking about those things. But the picture of aspiration doesn't include everyone. Protests and riots are daily reality for those with no stake. Exploited workers, neighbours to polluting factories, farmers thrown off their fields. This is a much richer country than in 1989, but also more unequal, more corrupt, and much less likely to trust its government. So how to keep the post-Tiananmen generation in line? Beijing is marching them towards a middle-class future.
Outsiders often marvel at China's achievements over the past 25 years, but no one here takes their new urban lifestyle for granted. Life's a daily struggle for an education, for healthcare, for an apartment, for a job, and even for the means of actually, even for the means of getting to that job.
These young people are trying to grow a different China. On the Righteous Path farm, the message is harmony with the planet. They say their movement's growing as others reject the greed of city life. Radical, idealistic, but they know to steer clear of politics. There'll be no repeat of the Tiananmen generation.
They wanted freedom, democracy, equality. But their method was rebellion and criticism and getting out on the street to protest. Our attitude is positive. We are building a better society, not just condemning others.
25 years on from Tiananmen, this is a generation which knows what it can't have. But it doesn't always want the government songbook it's given. They want to voice their own China dream. And I find it hard to imagine that 25 years from now, they'll still be putting up with the platitudes of the one-party state. Carrie Gracie, BBC News, Beijing.
Friends, Barack Obama has been defending his decision to free senior Taliban militants in exchange for a U.S. soldier who was held captive for 5 years in Afghanistan. Some have been accusing the president of setting a dangerous precedent with the prisoner swap for Sergeant Bo Bergdahl, amid claims from some of his fellow soldiers who can tell you and knew that he was a deserter. Aleem Makbul reports from Washington.
Release me, please. I'm begging you. Bring me home.
Years of captivity, so many Taliban videos, and now Sergeant Bergdahl is finally free. But at what cost?
Please. Bring me home.
To secure his release, the US government negotiated with the Taliban and released 5 of the group's militants from Guantanamo Bay, seen here being welcomed in Qatar. But some of those who served with Bo Bergdahl say he's a traitor.
He walked right off the base. He deserted us in the middle of Afghanistan to go and find the Taliban.
It now appears Sergeant Bergdahl became disillusioned with America's role in Afghanistan. Critics say others died in the search to find him.
People calling him a hero and people calling him this great soldier, I mean, it's a spit in the face to the soldiers who died as a direct result to him leaving.
But family and friends and those who worked so hard to keep Bo Bergdahl's plight in the spotlight are just waiting to welcome him home.
The community of the Wood River Valley, we're staying out of the politics. We're going to leave that to the rest of the world, and we're just going to welcome Bo home with open arms. We have our boy back, and we're going to let everyone else deal with the politics of it all.
But there are serious questions about whether or not America's endangered more of its soldiers by being held to ransom in the way it has. The president says he has no doubts.
Regardless of the circumstances, whatever those circumstances may turn out to be, we still get an American soldier back if he's held in captivity. Period. Full stop.
Well, it was just a few days ago President Obama was appearing here with the parents of Bo Bergdahl, celebrating his release. But for many Americans, this has become anything but a success story for the White House. Aleem Makbul, BBC News in Washington.
Thank you, Aleem. Friends, more tragic news out of the United States. I say tragic because one story after another just shows you blundering mistakes that relate to what God says he'll do to a nation when they pass laws and do the kind of things that are a thumb in God's face and to his law that say, we're going to ignore your law. We're not going to obey it. But when you look in Leviticus 26 or Deuteronomy 28, you see that God tells us He tells the individuals, both severally and jointly or collectively as a nation. He says, if you obey me, you will be blessed. You'll be blessed individually and especially as a nation. When the majority of you obey me, you will be blessed. On the other, and blessed in tremendous, wonderful ways. You'll be the head, not the tail. You'll be the lender, not the borrower. One of you will chase 100 in battle. You know, your enemy in your agriculture, I'll bless you with rain. And protection. But when you disobey God, he says, just the flip-flop of those things. You'll be the tail, not the head. You'll be the borrower, not the lender. Your enemies will chase you out. And we're getting into that kind of situation. And on top of that, he even adds in verse 19, I will break the pride of your power. And that indicates a nation that at one time had power. And the United States has had recognizably the ultimate power as a superpower. But God says, you disobey me, and this nation is thumbing its nose in God's face with disobedience. And God says, I'll break the pride of your power, and I'll make your heaven as iron and your earth as brass. Try to grow crops in brass, friends. You know, it don't work. I mean, it's a brass, like hard brass. Try to hoe hard brass. Just try to hoe regular earth that hasn't had rain on it in a long time. And the United States is now in the worst drought it's ever had. We've seen more wildfires as a result of it. We've seen farmers selling off their cattle. Their skinny cattle. They're not making a good profit on it. They're just basically giving their animals away, selling them for what they can, because there's no rain, as we should have, for vegetation, for feeding and watering the cattle. I will break the pride of your power. Leviticus 26, verse 19. You read it. Next story. And just at the time when things are heating up, you'll hear in this story how just at the time when things are heating up with Russia, here is the United States, the leaders, the present leaders of the United States, giving away a critical air base. This video will show you an official closing ceremony that's been held at the U.S. Air Base in Friends, I don't know if I can say that name of that air base tonight. I'm going to spell it for you. K-Y-R-G-Y-Z-S-T-A-N. They'll pronounce it in this video.
Transit Center Manats was an important hub that provided logistical support for US and NATO troops in Afghanistan. Now, all its missions have been stopped because the base is about to be closed. If you look around, this place is almost empty. There were tents here where soldiers used to stay on their way in or out of Afghanistan. The place here was called Hotel Alaska, but now all tents here are gone. And this is a Pete's Place, a popular recreational center where soldiers spend their time playing ping pong or pool or just chatting to each other over a drink while they were waiting for a departure either home or to Afghanistan. And today, the commander of the base conducted an official closing ceremony and handed a symbolic key to local state officials, transferring all these facilities to the Kyrgyz government. There is a runway a few hundred meters away from here, and it's also empty, but there were about 20 aircraft before, including giant C-17s that transported tons of cargo to and from Afghanistan and millions of military personnel. This place is not just a transit center, it also stationed KC-135 refueling planes. People call them flying petrol stations because they patrol the skies of Afghanistan 24 hours a day, refueling military fighting jets and other aircraft of the coalition member states. It's ironic, Kyrgyzstan is the only country in the world that hosts both Russian and American military bases on its territory. But it's about to lose this status. And it's happening at a time when the tensions between Russia and the West are rising again.
And that was a good way for him to end that. Just as the tensions between the United States and Russia are rising again, and both Russia and the United States had bases there in Afghanistan. You heard him tell you the country, the exact area, and friends, I had to wrestle with a horse that broke out of its field today and deal with neighbors and the police over that horse. It's not even my horse. I'm just trying to help out a neighbor that lives 100 miles from here. And whew, that's a strong, high-spirited horse. But I did that to help keep him from being taken to the place where they put abandoned horses to help out my neighbor. So, but that air base is, I'm going to spell it for you, Kyrgyzstan. I could say it earlier, but my mouth just won't form it tonight. I'm sorry. Kyrgyzstan. That's close, but I'm not saying the whole thing. Some of you, if you can say it, send me a recording. I'll play your recording here. And we thank the reporter, and I'm not going to try to butcher. I'm not going to butcher the reporter's name. And thank him that he said it so well. Friends, our next story is kind of a light one after a heavy day for me. Maybe you've had a day where you will enjoy a story that's a little bit different. A story from the United States where maybe this is something some of you have wanted to see. Sometimes don't you hate the over formality that goes on inside of a courtroom? Sometimes, it can be a bit much. So maybe this will give us a break from the usual courtroom tensions that we often see. It'll be so wonderful when God's kingdom is ruling on the earth and when Jesus Christ is here as the King of Kings. And some of us will be married to Jesus Christ and sitting on his throne with him as his bride, sharing his throne, with the ability to see inside of men's hearts and to know when they're lying and when they're not. Today we have to put up with formalities and try to figure out ways to figure out who's telling the truth. And it creates a tense court situation. But today, a fight broke out in a U.S. court between a county judge and a public defender. And audio of the altercation was heard on courtroom video. The Florida judge, John Murphy, at one point asked public defender David Weinstock if he wanted to go out and fight. Mr. Weinstock approached the bench, and out of camera view, sounds of a fight ensued. Officials say the judge punched Mr. Weinstock. We've got it all on video right here for you. Chris, the punch is off camera, just like the lead-in to this says. You'll only hear the audio where the judge punches the public defender. The verbal confrontation that led up to the physical altercation was captured on this courtroom video.
This is an emergency.
If I had a rock, I would throw it at you right now. Stop pissing me off. Just sit down. I'll take care of it. I don't need your help.
No,
sit down.
I'm a public defender. I have a right to be here, and I have a right to stand and represent my clients.
If you want to fight, let's go out back, and I'll just beat your ass.
Here comes the punch. There you are, friends. You saw the courtroom video for yourself and heard the, and the words. All right, maybe that's a little relief for some of us. All right, more to a couple of serious stories now as we close up. A story related, our next one, to the fourth seal. Before the Great Tribulation, there are 4 categories of events that Jesus Christ described would happen before his return and before the end of this age. And after those 4 events, then there would be a 5th event, a 5th seal, the Great Tribulation that Jesus Christ described as a martyrdom of saints. Now that hasn't occurred yet. I mean, the Great Tribulation hasn't occurred yet. A type of it occurred some hundreds of years ago. Fox's Book of Martyrs writes of many martyrs, but nothing like what's coming. And before that Great Tribulation, which I say nothing like what's coming because Jesus Christ himself describes it as the worst time of trouble since the beginning of the world. If you look in Matthew 24, we've repeated that here often. And beginning with verse 20, verses 21 and 22, we see that verse 20 reminds us to pray that your flight be not in the winter nor on the Sabbath day. For the reason for that is this: then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. It's a time that's so bad, nothing before it has ever been so bad, nothing after it ever again, thankfully, will be as bad as what's coming in this great tribulation. It'll be the time of World War III. It'll be the time of a revived Holy Roman Empire with the 7th and final head of it. The 6th head came for a short period of 9 years between 1936 and 1945 with Mussolini as its head. And 1945, end of the 6th head, Roman Empire, Holy Roman Empire, back into the abyss, awaiting round 3 of World War at a time when the Pope will hold a coronation ceremony in the Emperor's Hall in Frankfurt, Germany, and place the crown on a German emperor who will reign over 10 nations or 10 regions or 10 districts that maybe are a remapping of Europe by the Pope, who will ride herd over what God calls the beast power. The emperor will be a beast. The system he's over is a beast-like system. And those who don't bow down and worship the image of this beast, those who refuse to work on God's Sabbath day, will take the mark of the beast, and then they will suffer the day of the Lord that follows these first 6 seals. After the Great Tribulation, which is a part of Satan's wrath, it's during the first 6,000 years of the day of man and Satan. At the end of the Great Tribulation, there will be heavenly signs. There will be a silence for a half hour while God seals 144,000. And then the 7th seal will break out. The 7th seal, let me see if I can go to a wide version of this chart. You see the first 6 seals are on the left side of the chart. Then the 7th seal takes up all of the right side, more than half of the right side of the page, because the 7th seal consists of 7 trumpets, and the last trumpet, the 7th trumpet, consists of 7 last plagues. But all of that gets ahead of the picture. Coming back to the first 6 seals, we've had 4 of them count off so far. The white horse of religious deception, the red horse of war and rumors of war, and as of 1914, World War, round 1, and then 1939, World War, round 2, and then coming up in the future, in the very near future, round 3 of World War, which will kick off the 5th seal. And in between then and now, we have more of the 3rd seal and the 4th seal, the black horse of famine, the 4th seal, the pale horse with its rider named Death, of Loimus, disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt, seismus, earthquakes, and gale force winds of all kinds, and Tereke, just trouble that leads up to the great trouble. But the element of the 4th seal that Christ described as Loimus, which a Greek English lexicon defines as disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt. That seal is in our next story. The MERS virus has been identified in almost a dozen countries, but hit Saudi Arabia the hardest. Saudi Arabia says 282 people are now confirmed to have been killed by the MERS virus, almost 100 more than initially thought. The increase came after a national review of hospital data from the time the virus emerged in 2012. The deputy health minister, who has been criticized for his handling of the crisis, was sacked yesterday. Cases of the virus for which there's no known cure have been confirmed in almost a dozen other countries. Saudi authorities said there had now been 688 confirmed MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, infections in the kingdom. Before the revision, the number of cases was believed to be 575. You may hear some of these same figures in this video. Friends, Saudi Health Minister spokesman Tariq Madani said that despite the revised figures, fewer people were now contracting the disease. You know, they always play the positive side. We'll see what happens in the future with it, you know. Though we're expecting this fourth seal to increase, friends, it can't go backwards. Though the review showed confirmed cases that needed to be added, my news headline, lead-in lines say, we are still witnessing a decline in the number of newly registered cases in the past few weeks, he said. Of those infected, the county's health ministry said 53 were still receiving treatment. Saudi Arabia has registered the largest number of infections of MERS. The virus is from the same family as the common cold, but can lead to kidney failure and pneumonia. Now, in our next video story, relates to skin cancer. There's supposedly been a breakthrough. But you know, friends, I tell you what, cancer, everybody gets cancer once in a while. It comes and it goes. And they make a big deal out of scaring everybody, and they put people like my own dad, they put people through treatments they don't really need while they're guessing. Oh, we think he has cancer. No, we don't have any conclusive proof of it yet, but let's do this test. And you get online and you look, you see the test that they're doing with these things they put down the esophagus can cause cancer. So look, if he doesn't have cancer, we'll make sure we do the exams and tests and things that cause cancer so that by the time we're through, he will have cancer, and then all this will have been worth all the effort we went to be able to extract money out of the United States government for all this medical mess we do to people. And that's the name of the ball game sometimes, friends. You know, it's much better to trust God. He wants us to look to Him, and He is our healer. Jesus Christ having paid the price for even our pain and suffering when He took the 39 stripes. By His stripes. And that wasn't a picnic. By His stripes you are healed. It's a wonderful, as David described it in Psalm 103, it's a wonderful, wonderful benefit. If we go to Psalm 103 real quickly, we see the opening verses where David says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that's within me, bless His holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all His benefits." That's verse 2 of 103. And then in verse 3, David said, "Who forgives all your iniquities, who heals all your diseases." And of course, forgiving all your iniquities and healing all your diseases is really one and the same thing, as Jesus Christ put it in one of the instances where He was healing someone. He says, Doesn't make any difference whether I say take up your bed and walk or your sins are forgiven. It's one and the same thing. Friends, I see that we are out of time tonight. Thank you for joining me for this Tuesday night report. Let me just take a quick look and see if there's anything else I should maybe tell you about real quickly. I could, if we go over by half a minute or a minute, I could play a light-hearted video for you that tells why koala bears hug trees on hot days. Let's take a look at that, okay?
In the cool weather, the animals are sitting up near the leaves and feeding, but as it got warmer and warmer, the animals started moving down the trees to the thicker trunks and flopping themselves onto the tree trunks. They looked like they were just spread-eagled and hot and uncomfortable. We had access to a thermal camera, and so went back to the study site, and they took some pictures of koalas in the trees on hot days. And when we got the images back, it was just so obvious what the koalas were doing. You could see the koala sitting on the coolest part of the tree trunk with its bottom wedged right into the coolest spot and just dumping all that heat into the tree. If we had thermal vision, then it would have been an obvious thing. But because we just weren't aware that the trees were so much cooler than the air, it wasn't clear to us until we took those pictures exactly what the koalas were doing.
Okay, with that little report on why koalas hug trees on hot days, they're trading that heat off. If I see any of you out hugging trees, maybe I'll know you saw this report on a hot day. Hugging trees on a hot day, I'll know you saw this report. Okay, thanks for joining me. We went over a couple of minutes, and I'll sign off now with a comment that, God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll plan to be back again tomorrow evening, Wednesday night, with the current day's news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Again, thanks for joining me, friends. And until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying, good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.